Words, God's good English words, were at the heart of the lives of the settlers here. Improper speech was a crime. Blasphemy, slander, cursing, lying, perjury, railing, reviling, scolding, swearing, threatening, treason, and defying authority were all offences. The colonists were trying to control the language, and this set the pattern for their teaching of English. And as New England grew, this was how they did it, with the New England Primer.
A. In Adam's fall, sinned all. B. Heaven divided the Bible mind. C. Christ crucified for sinners died. D. The deluge drowned the earth around. E. Elijah.
From the very beginning, Americans took immense care over the correct teaching of English. It was taught well and in a way that was highly religious, and this set the tone as English spread. It wasn't all going English's way, though. Other European powers were jostling for influence in the New World. Delaware, where a Swedish settlement had taken root, was conquered in 1655 by the Dutch admiral Peter Stuyvesant and incorporated into the Dutch New Netherlands. His base, New Amsterdam, was in turn conquered by the British in 1664 and renamed New York. There was rivalry with the French, which turned into war. When it finally ended in 1763, Britain was given sole claim to the east of the continent and took a grip on the north in Canada. Even the Spanish colony of Florida came under British rule. But perhaps the real edge that gave English a stronger presence than the other European languages came not through the gun, but through the ploughshare. The Spanish, on the whole, concentrated on sending armies and priests to the New World and taking gold. The French were interested in sending fur trappers and trading with the natives. It was only the English who continued the spirit of the Pilgrim Fathers and came to stay. Persistence and sheer weight of numbers eventually ensured that English, not Spanish, Dutch or French, would be the language heard from the Atlantic coast to the Appalachian Mountains. But as English spread, it also started to develop a character of its own, to drift away from the language spoken in England. There was already the beginnings of the tomato-tomato problem. In some cases, meaning shifted. The English shop had become an American store. Lumber meant rubbish in the old country. To Americans, lumber was, and still is, cut timber. And haul came to mean to transport in a vehicle, not, as in England, to move by force. American English was also developing its own sound. The first settlers had come from various parts of England, each with its own regional accent. But no single accent dominated. As they talked to each other, the variety very quickly became a blend. To this day, there's only a tiny variation in accents across America compared to Britain, and the further west you go, the more true that becomes. By the middle of the 18th century, the absence of regional pronunciations and dialect words was being noted approvingly by upper-class British visitors, who regarded all such variations as vulgar. In 1764, Lord Gordon wrote, "The propriety of language here surprised me much. The English tongue being spoken by all ranks in a degree of purity and perfection surpassing any but the polite part of London." It's a sentiment that would be repeated again and again, that the Americans didn't just speak good English, they spoke it better than the English themselves. It wasn't only where language was concerned that the colonists began to stand up to the English. Tension was growing between them and the Crown. In 1775, here on this bridge at Concord in Massachusetts, 75 American volunteers confronted 700 British troops. One of them fired what has ever since been called, with a touch of hyperbole, the shot heard round the world. Revolution had begun. A year later, 13 colonies declared their independence and did so in perfect, what we might call classical English.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
John Adams, who had become the second President of the United States, wrote of a future in which all Americans spoke the language equally well, in which eloquence would be the way to high office, and no one would be excluded because their speech betrayed inferior origins. It was the birth of a democratic ideal that's still part of the American myth, that anyone can become president, and everyone would have a presidential vocabulary and accent. This was no longer the King's English, but perhaps the people's English, and they wanted to set it in stone. This is another foundation of America, not a rock, but a little blue book. It was written by a schoolteacher called Noah Webster. Through the last years of the 18th century and the 19th century, it was sold in countless general stores like this one, stacked among the tins of molasses and sacks of beans, the snake oils, paraffin lamps and shovels. It soon became known as the American Spelling Book, or the Blue-Backed Speller. It sold at 14 cents a copy, and in its first 100 years it sold 60 million copies, more than any other book in American history with the exception of the Bible. This is one of the most influential books in the history of English.
The first word is academic. The first sound is A-C.
Ac.
Perfect. The next part is D-E-M.
Dem.
I-C.
Ic.
All together.
Academic.
Democratic. D-E-M.
The hundreds of words and model sentences in Webster's book have been repeated by millions of children on countless occasions.
All together.
Democratic.
Very nice.
And the practice is thought to have changed the sound of the language. To this day, Americans tend to pronounce words with a far more even emphasis than the English, and in particular than the clipped vowels of the English aristocracy, whose influence Webster wanted to oppose. Where the English say cemetery, the Americans have cemetery. English laboratory, American laboratory. But pronunciation wasn't all that he influenced. It was from this book that America learned how to spell. Correct spelling came to be seen as a standard of education and civilization throughout America, and it still is today. And the spelling bee became part of the life of every town and village.
This morning we're going to start our spelling lesson with practice for the spelling bee that we're going to be doing. The first word is syllable. Sometimes when you study words, you might break them into a syllable pattern.
Webster's book standardized spelling across America, and he also tried to improve on inconsistent and illogical spellings.
The next word is democracy.
D-E-M-O-C-R-Y.
Under Webster's system, honor, color, and a score of similar words lost their U. Double letters were reduced to single ones, like the L in traveller or the G in wagon. ER replaced RE as the ending of theatre or centre. Defence with a C became defence with an S. Axe lost its E.
Axe.
A-X.
Perfect. I see you've all been doing your homework.
England had made the language, but America had begun to claim its future. By the 1820s, East Coast America was presenting itself confidently as the guardian of English, beating off vulgarity and fashion. There was even a cheeky motion proposed in the House of Representatives to invite the sons of the English aristocracy to come to America to learn how to speak properly. Americans felt they'd kept the English language pure for 200 years, so pure that they were still using words the English had dropped, words like a greenhorn, burly, deft, scant, talented, and likely. Americans still say sick to mean ill, not just nauseous. They say fall, meaning autumn, just as the English did once. And when Americans say I guess, they're using a form of words that would have been familiar to Chaucer, I guess. And they denied that they were changing the language. When Webster published his groundbreaking American dictionary in 1828, he claimed that this, contained less than 50 terms that were new to the country.